Hello, and welcome to the 404 Media Podcast, where we bring you unparalleled access to hidden worlds, both online and IRL. 404 Media is a journalist-founded company and needs your support to subscribe. Go to 404media.co. As well as bonus content every single week, subscribers also get access to additional episodes where we respond to their best comments. Gain access to that content at 404media.co. I'm your host, Joseph, and with me are two of the 404 Media co-founders, the first being Emmanuel Mayberg.
Hello.
And Jason Kebler.
Hey.
Sam will join us for the second half of the show. Right now, there is one story which is basically across all of tech, all of AI, and Emmanuel wrote about it. The headline is DeepSeek Mania Shakes AI Industry to its Core. Emmanuel, first off, let's just keep it super basic to start. What is DeepSeek and where did it come from? Because to a lot of people, it feels like this just happened overnight.
Yeah. DeepSeek is an AI model that's developed by a Chinese company of the same name that itself was spun out from a Chinese hedge fund. And it was, I've heard about it several times. Like, I follow the frontier model space, which is a way to refer to the leading AI models. And it released last week. The AI community was very excited about it. Whenever one of these models is released, there's a bunch of benchmarks that people run to see how it compares to all the other models. It scored very well on the benchmarks, was beating OpenAI on some things, was beating Llama, which is the open weight model from Meta. Again, this is normal. Like, the newest thing is usually pretty good. And the hype started to build more and more as people learned more about how it was made. And now we're at the point where I'm surprised. I think like my best way to measure how impactful a particular piece of news is when I hear about it from my mom. I almost never get a text asking what this or that is in the news. And I got a text from her yesterday, which was just like, hey, do I need to worry about this Chinese AI thing?
I mean, what was she potentially worried about? And I mean, I'm not trying to put your mom on blast. It's just it's symptomatic of this isn't just hype. There's almost like worry and concern. Yeah,
totally. And I think for me, as someone who's like followed it from the beginning, I was totally prepared for everything that was about to happen. Over the weekend, it became very clear that this was going to have an impact that is going to escape the AI nerd community and going to have like a real impact on the market. And I think that's why I heard about it from her. I don't watch CNN. She watches a lot of CNN. And I'm sure that she just turned on the TV in the morning and it's one of those screens that's showing you all the stocks and everything is red. And the news anchors are like, China, AI, America, World War III, question mark? You know, just like, and she was like, I'll call my son who knows computers.
Wait, but let me take a shot at explaining like why people are freaking out, because it is true that this is a Chinese developed large language model. The model is called R1, the one that they released, and then the ChatGPT competitor is just called DeepSeek, and you can use it on your phone. So it's the top app in the App Store. So there's the sort of normal like, Americans are using Chinese tech. We're worried about that. But the big thing is that this was developed using old chips and fewer chips than normally are used. And they spent somewhere around like $5.6 million or something like that on training, which is a number that, as you explain in your article, we should be skeptical of. But like the argument that the people who are freaking out are saying is like OpenAI and NVIDIA and all American tech companies have spent a ton of money training their AI models. And by a ton of money, I mean billions and billions and billions of dollars. Here is a Chinese company that comes along and spends, frankly, like $5.6 million. If you take that at face value, which I don't know if we can, that's like peanuts for any AI startup. Like that's essentially no money. It's performing better than OpenAI's most advanced publicly released model. I think it's O1 is OpenAI's most advanced model, I believe. And it's free. It's released for free, and they did it using old chips because China cannot get the newest NVIDIA chips because of export controls. So the narrative in people's heads is like China beat the US with less money and old technology. What the fuck? Is that right, Emmanuel? Like, is that the argument for like why people are freaking out?
Yeah, that's totally accurate. And the the single headline that dominated Monday morning and what sent the markets into a frenzy is that this impacted Nvidia's value. Ever since the AI boom took over the world, Nvidia has been the primary. I mean, you could argue TSMC, which is like further up the supply chain or further down the supply chain, further up the supply chain and chip manufacturing. But Nvidia has like the key designs that and chips that are powering this AI revolution. And Meta, Google, Amazon, OpenAI, Microsoft, all these companies, when they're building AI, they are paying NVIDIA for massive amounts of chips in order to train their AI. So Elon Musk very proudly announced last year that XAI, which is X's or Tesla's or Elon Musk's AI company, has a cluster of 100,000 NVIDIA chips. And those clusters just keep getting bigger. And like at the moment, all these companies are kind of eyeballing their path to like, can we make a cluster with 1 million chips? Because that's going to give us a much stronger AI model. And that's been the paradigm we've been in for like the past 3 to 4 years. More chips, more compute, more training data equals better AI. Whoever has the best and most is going to win the AI race. And if you believe what these people say about how important AI is going to be, you're going to like dominate the world.
And more advanced chips, crucially, because NVIDIA will release new ones every single time. And the idea is the American companies will be getting those. So it's not just quantity or expenditure. It's, as you say, the access to the latest and greatest, allegedly greatest.
Yeah. And like at the highest level, these companies are competing for like, oh, NVIDIA just announced a new design and they're competing like, okay, well, put me down for 1 million chips, and they're fighting about who's going to get them first because it's so important to have these chips in order to win the race.
I believe they've called this like a digital moat or something, where
Right,
it's
yeah.
like US companies will get the awesome chips and China will get like old tech, and that will naturally just keep American tech companies ahead of Chinese tech companies.
If I can give a very crude analogy to explain it, it's like the Americans are only, they get the PS5s. The Chinese companies can only have PS3s, maybe even a PS2, but they made a really sick game for PS3 and PS2, and everybody's like, damn, maybe you just don't need the latest console.
I think that's it. I think that's
That
pretty
works
much
for me,
it.
totally. Like imagine suddenly, a Chinese game developer releases a PS2 game that looks like a PS5 game. Everybody's like, hey, what are we doing wasting all this money?
Right. So,
and they're like, we made this in a weekend.
Yeah.
with like some spare parts.
I think we'll get back to the stocks in a second, but who are some of the big names reacting and how are they reacting? I'm thinking of A16Z. What are they saying?
Yeah, everybody's reacting. I mean, obviously before it became world news, it was huge in the AI space, so everybody had a take. Mark Andreessen, who's one of the co-founders of A16Z, he said, I think it's to be seen if he's correct, but I totally understand the sentiment. He called it AI's Sputnik moment, and that is referring to the Russian satellite, which got ahead of the United States in the space race, and it was kind of an oh shit moment for the United States to say we're in a more competitive space with Russia than we realized about space exploration and it's the Cold War, so it's the weaponization of space and all that. And that kind of accelerated the US space program. And I think that is the analogy he's making. It's a wake-up call for American companies to realize that these sanctions that sanctions is probably not the right word. These export restrictions on AI chips that the Biden administration has put in place for the reason of hobbling their ability to compete in this AI race, right? That's not going to cut it, right? And the idea that we just have a massive amount of capital and we're just going to throw it at these AI problems with these bigger and bigger clusters, which has people expressed doubt about like the technology and theory behind that starting last year, but this is tangible proof that that is not going to cut it. The U.S. needs to be competitive in more areas than just capital and access to chips. We have to, the U.S. has to have innovative research. They have to have the best talent. They have to realize that the Chinese universities and research that are happening in China are not to be dismissed. These are real competitors that can make real progress that it leapfrogs the American AI companies despite all the advantages that they have.
So the another take that I've seen is the sort of China surveillance and China censorship take, which is like if this or there's going to be other models that come out very soon like this, as you've reported on and as we'll talk about, like these models will get leapfrogged. This will happen over and over again, but like at the moment there's a bunch of people using DeepSeek. It's the top app in the App Store. People are showing that it's censored in the way that you would sort of like expect Chinese technology to be censored. The obvious example is like if you ask it about Tiananmen Square, it will not answer. And then people also saying like, hey, this is Chinese propaganda, Chinese surveillance, blah, blah, blah. I'm not sweeping that under the rug. I'm just saying that's an argument that people are talking about. You raised the very good point that ChatGPT is also censored in several ways. Can you just talk a little bit about that and that aspect of the
Yeah, I think the way I think about it is to go back to one of the earliest stories that I did at 44 Media, which is about this guy named Eric Hartford who takes these open weight models like Meta's Llama, and because they're open weights and he can modify them, he creates uncensored versions of these AI models. And Joe, I know this always gets to you that they use this terminology, but OpenAI, they would consider a censored and woke model, right? Because it won't tell you how to make a bomb, and it won't tell you about the Hunter Biden laptop, or so. I don't know if that one's actually true, but it restricts what it says about the election. And something that we bring up all the time is that it kind of refuses to engage with anything remotely sexual, things like this. And the argument that the people who make the uncensored models have always made, and this is an argument that Mark Andreessen has made as well, and he has funded Eric Hartford, and he has funded these group of small developers who create uncensored models because they argued that, okay, maybe the way that OpenAI censors its models doesn't bother you because you happen to align with their ideology because you live in America and you're American and you don't want the AI to engage with these questions. But if we accept that paradigm, should another country create another dominant AI model and they have their own censorship based on their culture that we don't agree with, we have to live under that, right? So that is the argument for the uncensored model. And this moment, this DeepSeek moment of it, showing people that it is possible that we will live in a world where the AI that is dominant is made in China really freaks people out because we then have to accept Chinese restrictions and Chinese culture and the way that impacts their AI model, right? It's very similar to the TikTok argument. It's like social media is bad, but we accept it. But at the moment it becomes a social media that is dominant as Chinese, people really freak out. And it's the same dynamic here. Facebook does bad things, TikTok does bad things. We are more willing to accept the bad things that Facebook does because it's our social media company as opposed to the Chinese social media company. And you're seeing the same thing here. And I think in a way, though I have a lot of criticisms of the uncensored model argument and community, I think this really proved their point where if you allow for censorship or restrictions on an AI model, just like as a theory of how AI should be managed, then you also have to accept it when it comes from a different country. And that obviously really bothers people.
Right. And it should be mentioned quickly that DeepSeek is an open weights model, meaning you can tweak how it works and you can run it locally, although we don't have all the information on how it was trained, so it's not fully open source.
Yeah, it seems really trivial, to be fair to DeepSeek or the people who are using it and defending it. It seems really trivial to get around this Tiananmen Square restriction. You just have to run it locally. I've seen people use different languages to get around the restrictions. It's like this is a form of jailbreaking, but I saw someone engage with DeepSeek in Hebrew and it just answered all the questions. I saw someone get around it by using LeetSpeak, where you replace letters with numbers, and then it also engaged with the questions.
That's my primary language. So
I was going to say it's Emmanuel's language.
So it's a restriction that is there, but the idea that the problem with this particular model of DeepSeek is that it's restricting information that the Chinese government doesn't want people to have is sort of, I don't know, unserious because it's open weights and you can get around it. And
I think with all of these takes flying, and I'll just say, I think Perplexity has actually added support for it as well, where you can now interact with this model through Perplexity. And I presume they're running it locally in their own ways, right? Not locally to the user, obviously. So there's all of these takes flying around, but you kind of have one main one in the article. And I'm referring to, even though this is a pretty significant event, is it kind of impossible to tell what's going to happen with the AI industry based on it? Like, what's sort of your main takeaway from this?
I think my main takeaway is that the AI space is moving very fast and is developing at the rate of like rapid scientific discovery, and that is the schedule that it's on, and that is very hard to predict. We don't know where it's all going to end up. Some people who are kind of cheering and waiting for the AI bubble to burst really hope that this downturn in the market that is instigated by Nvidia and AI companies this is the AI bubble popping and now it's all going to go away. I'm skeptical of that. Maybe that happens later. I don't know. I don't make predictions. If I was able to make predictions about the stock market, I wouldn't be talking to you. I'd be on my yacht. But so it's like AI is moving at the pace of scientific discovery and the markets are moving emotionally. It's like we're seeing like an emotional reaction in the market. I am doubtful that this will hold. I am doubtful that this is terrible for Nvidia in the long term because they are still the dominant hardware player in this space. It is possible that later on China, especially because we're imposing these export restrictions on them, will develop their own supply chain for the chips that does devalue Nvidia. But at the moment, Nvidia is the main player. And, like one obvious argument about that is, okay, DeepSeek has discovered these new, far more efficient reinforcement learning strategies that allow them to develop models that are better for less. But the research is out there. Nvidia is going to figure this out. Facebook is going to figure this out. There was a report in a Wall Street Journal, I think, that Meta has several war rooms just trying to reverse engineer, recreate this stuff.
Wow.
But the American companies will catch up, and then they'll have these new efficiencies and the access to chips, and that will just make them better and more efficient. So, and I also think, we talked about leapfrogging. Meta gets ahead, Google gets ahead. These companies kind of vie for the top spot, depending on whose research is latest and best. For a while there, Mistral, which is this French AI company, was really far ahead for a minute. And people didn't freak out about that, I think, because it's a European company. And the markets didn't freak out about that. They weren't like, oh my God, OpenAI is doomed and Meta is doomed because this French company suddenly has a better model. When it's a Chinese company, people, I think, react emotionally because China is perceived as this adversary of the US and the West. And that's why I think people are freaking out. And I think it's very plausible that a few weeks from now, OpenAI will release a new model. Everybody will agree that this is the latest and best. And we'll go back to where we were, which is rah, 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 America and the future controlling AI.
Yeah, it seems more like
I'm going to go to
flashpoint.
my war room to determine what this means.
I think you're in it right now. It's your
I
garage.
am. I'm always in it 24/7.
All right, we'll leave that there. And we'll be right back after the break with another story. We'll be back after this.
It's a new year, so it's time to make some moves. Maybe you start a new business, launch a new product line, or organize your existing operations. For us, this meant a total refresh of all of 404 Media's merch, which we could do only with Shopify. Make this year different and better with Shopify. The best time to start your business is right now. Shopify makes it easy to create your brand, open for business, and get your first sale. It couldn't be easier. Shopify has thousands of customizable templates. No coding or design skills required. All you need to do is drag and drop. Shopify's powerful social media tools let you connect all your channels and create shoppable posts to help you sell your product everywhere people scroll. With Shopify, it's easy to manage your growing business, ship your products, collect taxes, and manage payments from a single portal. So you can focus on the important stuff, like growing your business. Don't kick yourself when you hear this again in a year because you didn't do anything now. With Shopify, your first sale is closer than you think. Established in 2025 has a nice ring to it, doesn't it? Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/media, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/media to start selling with Shopify today. Shopify.com/media. Support for the 404 Media podcast comes from Coda. Picture this. You're starting a new project at work and your vision is clear. You know exactly who's doing what and where to find the data you need to do your part. Everything is organized and you don't have to go searching for everything. That's because everything your team needs, from project trackers and OKRs to documents and spreadsheets, lives in one tab, all in Coda. Coda's collaborative all-in-one workspace gives you the flexibility of docs, the structure of spreadsheets, the power of applications, and the intelligence of AI in one easy-to-organize tab. Coda connects tools and teams so that you spend less time switching gears. We're a small team, but we do everything for the whole business. With Coda, we're able to combine what would have once taken lots of different siloed pieces of software and puts them in one place where the four of us can see everything, track our progress, and make moves to help our business. More than 50,000 teams trust Coda to keep them more aligned and focused. To try for yourself, go to coda.io/404media today and get started for free. That's coda.io/404media to get started for free. coda.io/404media.
Today's episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. In 2025, maybe you're ready for a plot twist, or maybe there's a part of your story you've been wanting to revise. Life isn't about resolutions that fade by February. It's about picking up the pen and becoming the author of your own journey. And therapy? It's like having an editorial partner, helping you craft new chapters, set boundaries, and become the best version of yourself. BetterHelp makes getting that support easy. With over 30,000 credentialed therapists and a fully online platform, therapy is affordable, convenient, and designed to fit your schedule. Plus, you can switch therapists anytime at no extra cost. Therapy has certainly helped me find a better version of myself, and with BetterHelp, we've found it's convenient, affordable, and flexible for our busy schedules. Write your story with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/404media today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/404media.
All right, and we are back, and then Sam is now with us. We're going to talk about a story that she wrote. The headline is, Memos to Federal Employees were written by people with ties to Project 2025, metadata shows. A lot going on in that headline. Maybe let's just start with, what are some of these memos that were sent by the Office of Personnel Management, which, for those people who don't know, is basically the US government's big HR department. That's how I think of it anyway.
Yeah, it's honestly, I will admit, I had not heard of this office before this week. It's like there are so many like little like federal offices that I think a lot of people are learning about for the first time because they're in crisis thanks to
the
Trump
other
administration.
only reason anyone would ever know about OPM was it got hacked like
by the Chinese
7 years ago, and
Yeah.
that's the only reason anyone would have ever heard of this office, I feel.
Yeah.
But they're sending these things which are impacting a ton of people. And what are they? Like, what are they telling people to do or not do, I guess?
I mean, they're sending a bunch of memos, which memos are public on their website. So anyone can go and look at them and download them as PDFs, but they're sent out to federal workers and federal departments. And obviously, this is a big thing right now because Trump is, working on firing a lot of federal workers in order to, sow chaos, instill people who are loyal to him, doing all these kind of like loyalty checks with federal workers. And seeing if they, gutting like DEI obviously is a big one that's been in the news lately. So these memos go out and the memos say, I can read you like some of the titles. They're pretty self-explanatory, but some of the ones that we looked at just from this week were, one was called Guidance on Presidential Memorandum Return to In-Person Work, which one of the things that Trump has done is said, all federal workers have to return to the office. Whereas before they were allowed to work remotely in a lot of cases. Now everyone who's a federal worker has to be in the office. And that's what that memo is about. And then there's others that are about like, obviously diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. There are, it's just like a lot of them are like kind of dry, but then some of them are pretty, unprecedented / spicy in general.
There's a hiring freeze as well, right?
Yeah, there's a hiring freeze one for like federal workers, which is obviously not something that happens every day. I don't know if it's happened, in the last 4 years, certainly. So yeah, they're going out to federal workers basically and saying, this is what you need to then disseminate to your department. Whatever it is.
So we'll get to the metadata in a bit and the authors and that sort of thing. But there's been, I would say, a ton of chatter around these memos. And, there's a lot of posting on social media, I would say. There's all of these Reddit posts. Some are going to be more believable than others. Of course, you have to take everything with a pinch of salt or, go and verify it as we do in some cases that we can. And I mean, even just beyond sort of these memos, there are like multiple journalists tweeting that they've never seen sort of this many leaks in a way. And I know these memos are public, but it's just sort of associated with the massive reaction that federal employees are having. It's like a lot of them, it seems, are leaking to other journalists as well. But my question for you is, how are federal employees reacting to these memos? Like, are you seeing a lot of pissed off people online?
Yeah, I mean, I think all of us at this point here at 404 at this point have had folks reach out to us who are federal workers. There's a ton of them, like they're across all different sectors, all different industries, working on lots of different things. So, they're, like you said, they're hitting up journalists and saying, this is what I'm seeing. And they're freaked out. Obviously, it's a big deal. They're worried about their jobs. They're being forced to do stuff that they don't agree with. Like we'll talk about later, like scrubbing websites and things like that, that have to do with like, diversity and inclusion and those sorts of things. So yeah, they're worried. But at the same time, it's like, there's just not a ton that they can do, from the inside. They're federal workers, so if they want to like do some kind of protest, it's a federal crime. I mean, I assume, but yeah, it's like they're very disheartened, it seems, about the whole entire situation because they're being told to do stuff that they morally, ethically don't agree with as people. So
yeah, I don't think people will be mad, understandably, depending on your own circumstances, about the need to return to office or something like that. But broadly, many people are simply mad because they don't agree with the incoming administration for various reasons.
Yeah,
right?
and like not agreeing, and they're like not like supporting Trump at this point. It seems like that's a fireable offense, which that is very unprecedented. That's it's something that we're going to see more of in the coming days, I think. But like, not like being gung ho about what he's doing seems to be something that puts you on the chopping block as a federal worker now, which is horrifying.
Yeah,
I think one of the tricky things is that the administration has shut down effectively so many different parts of the government and has also made it very difficult for government employees to talk to outside contractors. And for anyone who's not familiar, like many, like technically third-party contractors actually are basically government employees. This is just like how the government works. And it's like there is so much happening because essentially anyone who works for any of these massive agencies is being affected in some way, shape, or form. And these are literally millions of people. And so trying to tell that story is very, very difficult. For us as a small team, but also for like the media in general. And, I think you can create like a coherent narrative of what is happening where it's, the Trump administration is just like pausing the government and it's having all of these knock-on effects. But getting into these specific effects is like essentially impossible because there are so many.
Yeah, the scale is almost unfathomable in a way, and you can't really communicate it in a single article necessarily, or whatever medium you're using. Just because we're talking about OPM, and I guess we'll touch on this in the subscribers only section as well, but considering OPM, they have created these sort of tip lines, right, Jason, where people can email in to, basically rat on their co-workers when it comes to them running certain DEI programs. Can you just talk about that briefly? And I think you saw that in some of the memos and maybe wrote a little bit about it, or?
Yeah, I don't have the memo in front of me right now because there's a couple different ones, but
and a couple different email addresses as well.
That's what I mean. I think it's like DEIA info at opm.gov or something. And yeah, DEIA truth at opm.gov, where literally they're just asking people to rat on their colleagues who may be trying to smuggle in diversity, equity, and or inclusion by any other name, which is really wild and is pretty McCarthy-esque. There's also this thing where I believe it's HR at opm.gov, where it's a sort of master email where the federal government can email every single federal employee, which is not a capability that they had before. There was never like a system to email millions and millions and millions of people at once. And so there's been a few tests of this system over the last few days, and a lot of federal employees thought that it was initially a phishing exercise because they sent this email from this like random new email address and asked everyone to respond to it and just say like, hello, or like, I got this.
It's the worst reply all thread in like the history of email. Like people are going to be going, oh, hey, oh, sorry, I hit reply all to millions of federal workers or something.
Yeah. But basically it's like this relatively obscure HR agency has just taken it upon itself to become the investigators of the federal government, more or less.
Yeah. It would be a crazy HR move in a corporate context. Like we would be reporting on that, right? Somebody leaks us an email from inside some sort of AI company or tech company or whatever saying, hey, please rat out your co-workers who are trying to do certain things around diversity or other programs or whatever. But this time it's the government. I don't know. It's just crazy. All right, let's get back to your story, Sam. So OPM is sending out these memos. They're signed by senior officials, I think, but there's interesting stuff in the metadata. What did this data show exactly?
Yeah, so all of the memos are, like you said, they're signed by let's see, hang on. It's Charles Ezell, acting director at U.S. Office of Personnel Management. So it's like, that's a very normal person to be sending these memos because he's the director of OPM. And then sometimes they have a second author, like a second signature, but that's who they're ostensibly coming from. That's who they want you to think that they're coming from, I guess. But then if you go in, and this is something that someone found on Reddit, pointed this out, which I don't think many people would ever go to this length to try to look at this metadata. But like you said, it's like people are looking and talking about portions and sections and little dark corners of government correspondence that they haven't before. This person on Reddit said that if you download the PDF from the OPM website, from the public website, and then open it, and I opened it in Adobe Acrobat, but you can open it and then right click and go to like the document properties. And I think on Mac it's slightly different, but in the document properties, you can see the author, and the author is someone different. It's someone who's not, listed on the front of that letterhead. And that was definitely something worth digging into. And it turns out that the authors that are listed here, that the metadata says at least, are people who've been longtime Trump supporters, longtime like boosters of his agenda, and even in some cases, people who helped work on or create systems that set up a very scary agenda called Project 2025, which I think a lot of people have heard of by now, but it's still amazing that some people haven't, considering that's seems to be what we're in.
I mean,
it seems to be what's happening.
People connected to it have. I remember straight after the election, they were like, okay, actually, yeah, we can come mask off now and say that Project 2025 is the agenda. So there are two names you point to in the piece. Let's just take them one by one. The first piece of metadata says that the return to in-person work memo, it was signed by that senior official of OPM, as you said, but the metadata included the name Peters, Noah, as in Noah Peters. Just briefly, what did you include about that person?
Yeah, so the Noah Peters that this seems to be, his LinkedIn, and this is why I say it seems to be him, is his LinkedIn now says he's a senior advisor at the OPM, whatever that means.
There you go.
But, it's like his background is what's concerning here. It's that he is an attorney. He represented a guy named Jared Taylor, who is a really fun Google. But he is, I forget the exact wording, but he's, widely known as a white nationalist. And he sued Twitter in 2018 for banning his account. And because he's a white nationalist, and he lost that case. But that's the guy who was representing him, is Noah Peters. And then Peters has been kind of writing and talking publicly about how like Kyle Rittenhouse, who killed people at a Black Lives Matter protest, should receive restitution from the media because he's been acquitted, and the media reported on his case. It's things like that. It's like he's just a guy that like you don't love to see his name come up in this context, which he's writing apparently an in-person return to work memo.
Not the sort of person you would jump at the chance to ask, could you write a US government memo to go out to all federal employees? Okay, well, that's the first one. And then the second one is for the memo called Federal Civilian Hiring Freeze Guidance. What was the name on that document according to the metadata?
Yeah, so the metadata says that one was authored by James Shirk. And Shirk is also a fun Google. Just, guys that I wish I didn't have to know the names of. He was a special assistant on domestic policy in Trump's first term, and now he's back. But in the meantime, he was working at the Heritage Foundation, which is the think tank conservative group that architected the Project 2025 playbook. And then he was also on the Trump transition project called America First Policy Institute. And what's really important here and why it's important that he seemingly wrote a memo called Federal Civilian Hiring Freeze Guidelines, is that he came up with the classification that makes it easier to fire federal workers. That's called Schedule F. That removes their employment protections, makes it easier to get rid of them. And that is mentioned several times as a really key part of Project 2025, because Project 2025's playbook, which is it's like 900 pages or something, a long book.
Yeah, I ain't reading all that.
Well, you can go and read it on your free time, listeners.
No.
We won't do a dramatic reading. Yeah, but it's like mentioned, like Schedule F, which is the classification that Shirk invented, comes up often because it's this kind of this real linchpin to get rid of a bunch of federal workers to then reinstall people who are loyal to Trump. And that's a huge part of Project 2025's entire mission. Without that, it's really hard for them to get any of the other stuff that they want to do done. They need to overhaul the federal government in order to push forward a lot of these plans. And a lot of their plans are things like restricting reproductive access, mass deportation, and again, firing, tons of civil servants and reinstalling, like these people who are ride or die Trump. So yeah, he's a big one. And
I think those are the two you mentioned, right?
Those are the two. Yeah, and if you go through and people can look at this themselves. I've seen a couple people say online that the documents are now like the metadata is scrubbed. That's not what I found. I was still able to see the author data when I checked earlier today. But you could go through and like do this yourself. You can look at it yourself and see the different authors and see that they're not who is on the front of that actual letterhead.
Yeah,
and it's that would be a normal thing. It's like if you have like someone writing like your memo for you because you're the director of OPM. That seems, I was like, okay, fine. But like, these are not just like guys who report to the director. Like, if anything, the director is probably like taking calls from them.
Right.
I would imagine, obviously we don't know a lot of this stuff for sure, but they're not just like average, like administrative assistants. They're people who wrote the playbook for fascism. That's what we're working with.
They're not a secretary or assistant. Right.
Yeah.
So Sam touched on this, and I think just to sort of ask you, Jason, a slightly different way, like, why is it important to know who the people who seemingly wrote these memos are? Like, why does that matter,
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important because Trump swore up and down that Project 2025 he had nothing to do with, he knew nothing about, was not going to be involved with, blah, blah, blah. That is what like the Democrats tried to tie him to Project 2025, and rightly so, because this was obviously the playbook from the beginning. It was the transition plan from the beginning. But this is like hard evidence showing that these people are immediately in the government, are immediately writing like incredibly consequential memos, and are immediately having an impact on government. You know, unclear whether like anything resembling normal politics matters now or will ever matter again. But it's just evidence that yes, like Project 2025 was the plan the whole time, is the plan now. These people are in the government, are enacting policy, are making decisions, are writing memos that have, you know, real impacts on people's lives and how people interact with the government. And to the extent that like anyone gives a shit about any of this stuff anymore, which I think that they should, you know, theoretically that matters.
Yeah, and Trump distanced himself from Project 2025 this whole time when he was running because it was poisonous. And because most people hear, you know, the things that were laid out in it and they're like, "Oh, that's, you know, Christian nationalism. We don't like, we're not into that. That's like," and he distanced himself from it on purpose. He was like, "Well, that's not really what I'm into. I'm just, you know, for the economy or whatever the fuck." But you know, Biden was like, "Well, what about Project 2025?" And then just kind of let it go. And then it came out that, you know, Trump immediately started hiring like over 100 Project 2025 architects into his administration. So go figure.
I would like to throw a curveball at all of you at the end of the show, like I do often, which is while we've been talking, the White House did a press conference about the New Jersey drones that we have been talking about multiple times on the show in the past. And the White House press secretary said, quote, "This was not the enemy, and they were authorized to be flown by the FAA," the you know, drones that were being sighted above New Jersey for like weeks toward the end of last year. And that I reported on, wrote, and Ranted and Ray had done this podcast about how this happens all the time. It's a media-caused panic. You know, talk of conspiracy theory and aliens and all of that is like very dumb because we've seen it before. And I think it will be very, very, very interesting to see how the media covers this, how social media covers it, how like right-wing influencers talk about it, etc. Because the Biden administration said the exact same thing. They said these are FAA hobbyist drones, and or like, you know, we know what they are more or less, and it's no big deal. And when Joe Biden said it, or Joe Biden's press secretary said it, it became the biggest deal. And it was on every single cable news channel for weeks. And everyone was talking about it endlessly. And now here's Trump and Trump's administration saying the exact same thing. And everyone is going to fall in line immediately. The media is going to do a story saying, "Oh, it was no big deal. They're never going to talk about it again." And it's like, that is a really big problem. It's a really, 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 really big problem, because when the government, like under a Democrat, says, "Hey, like, here's what's going on," and the response from half of the nation is, "This is bullshit," and it's a conspiracy, and like up and down across, you know, the sort of cable news ecosystem, you pull on all of these like frankly whack jobs to shriek about something for a while, and it becomes this like entertainment value proposition. Like that is not a media ecosystem that we can abide. And it's like it's a really bad problem, and it is related to what we're talking about here, because it was clear to everyone that Project 2025 was going to be the plan forever, because that the Republicans spent years and years writing this down, 1,000 pages, putting people in positions of power and in positions to enact this like on day one. And Trump was able to say like, "Oh, actually, no." And it went away for a large segment of the population. And it's just like that capture of our like information ecosystem is very, very bad. And I'm sorry, this is not on our podcast document, but like no one is going to care about the drones ever again. It's crazy that this is happening.
One clarifying question, and maybe you don't know. But since you put a curveball on us, I'm gonna
please
strategically bat it back. I don't watch baseball. But the quote from this press conference is that after research and study, the drones that were flying over New Jersey in large numbers were authorized to be flown by the FAA for research and various other reasons. So there were government drones. They were being flown by the government, or like how are we supposed to read into that, or how do you think Griff?
I mean, so that's a great question, because
getting authorized or
getting
flying
authorized,
by them? Right.
Getting authorized by the FAA does not mean that they're being flown by the government. It means that they have flight clearance from the FAA. So it could be, university drones. It could be hobbyist drones. It's like you have to get a license to fly a drone now if you're flying for specific reasons. So it could mean that. And then the rest of this quote, which you tried to gotcha me.
I deliberately left it out.
Said many of these drones were also hobbyists, recreational, and private individuals that enjoy flying drones, which is sort of like what we were saying when we were doing our reporting on it, because a lot of people are flying drones for like whatever reason, and there's not, like, you do have to get an FAA license in some cases, but they then don't control where you fly. And so
But the way I'm reading that second part, that many of these drones are also hobbyists. Again, maybe I'm reading too between the lines here, but to me that sounds like, well, there were the FAA authorized ones, and then people started flooding the airspace with their garbage drones, all trying to jump on it, basically, which is kind of what you said earlier, right? It's like,
so I mean, I'm curious, like, there were a bunch of drones being seen, and there's things being flown all the time. So it could be like sometimes you need specific FAA authorization to fly a specific flight path if it's near an airport, for example. The Trump administration has not released these documents about like what the authorizations are, so it's unclear. It could be, they could be government drones to some extent. I believe there's another quote in here where Trump was saying something at some point, quote, "Look, our military knows where they took off from. If it's a garage, they can go right into that garage." Not sure what that means, but
good point.
I would guess that it was a mix of military drones, perhaps like NOAA or NASA drones, maybe like university research type stuff, and then also hobbyists. And, I mean, maybe this will continue to be some big conspiracy. I know that this was a month ago and people haven't been talking about it since the sightings magically went away around Christmas, when people were like paying attention to something else.
And there wasn't coverage. Exactly.
I know, and there wasn't coverage, but there's a Guardian article that we're talking about. Like, I wonder if this is going to, I mean, it's not going to, because it shouldn't, like lead CNN and Fox News and all that for hours and hours and hours upon end. Like, kind of doubt it.
Yeah, fair. All right, we'll leave that there, but I'm sure, I mean, Jason, you should probably go write about the drones now, probably for tomorrow or something.
You just dictated a blog, so please go get that document.
We'll do a text to speech. Yeah.
Until then, we will leave that there. If you're listening to the free version of the podcast, I'll now play us out. But if you are a paying 404 Media subscriber, we're going to talk about how GitHub is showing how the administration is scrubbing material from its websites and across the web in real time. You can subscribe and gain access to that content at 404media.co. As a reminder, 404 Media is journalist founded and supported by subscribers. If you do wish to subscribe to 404 Media and directly support our work, please go to 404media.co. You'll get unlimited access to our articles and an ad-free version of this podcast. You'll also get to listen to the subscribers only section, where we talk about a bonus story each week. This podcast is made in partnership with Kaleidoscope. Another way to support us is by leaving a 5-star rating and review for the podcast. Somebody did that recently. I was going to read it out and I forgot to put it in the document, so I'll do that next time. This has been 404 Media. We will see you again next week.